When action star Jason Statham paused mid-scene during a high-budget film shoot to comfort a crying child, nobody expected the cameras to capture what would become one of Hollywood's most heartwarming moments. The tough guy, known for his explosive fight scenes and death-defying stunts, was about to show the world a completely different side of himself, one that would leave everyone speechless and remind us all that true strength isn't always about throwing punches. Comment where you are watching from today, because this story is about to take you on an emotional journey you won't forget. The bustling streets of downtown Los Angeles hummed with the controlled chaos of a major film production. Massive trailers lined the cordoned-off blocks, their sides emblazoned with the logos of one of the year's biggest action franchises. Crew members scurried between equipment trucks, their walkie-talkies crackling with constant updates about lighting adjustments, camera positions, and the intricate choreography required for the day's ambitious stunt sequence. The air was thick with anticipation and the familiar scent of coffee from craft services, mixed with the exhaust fumes from idling generators powering the elaborate setup. At the center of it all stood Jason Statham, his weathered leather jacket, catching the morning sunlight as he reviewed the day's script with director Marcus Chen. The veteran action star's presence commanded respect from everyone on set, not through intimidation, but through the quiet confidence that comes from decades of professionalism in one of Hollywood's most demanding genres. His steel gray eyes scanned the pages with the same intensity he brought to every role, whether he was playing a master thief, an elite soldier, or a street racing wheelman. The sequence starts with Vincent emerging from the warehouse. Marcus explained, pointing to the detailed storyboard sketches. 3 vehicles pursue him down 5th Street. Then we cut to the rooftop chase that leads into the helicopter sequence. Jason nodded, his mind already visualizing each beat of the action, calculating the timing and physical demands of the stunts he'd be performing himself, as he always insisted on doing. Nearby, the film's supporting cast prepared for their roles. In the elaborate chase scene, Rebecca Cooper, playing the film's tech specialist, practiced her lines while costume assistants made final adjustments to her tactical gear. Richard Anderson, cast as the antagonist's right-hand man, worked through his blocking with the stunt coordinator, ensuring every movement would flow seamlessly with the high-speed cameras that would capture the sequence from multiple angles. Production had been months in the planning, with location scouts having secured permits for some of Los Angeles' most iconic streets. The insurance costs alone had reached into the millions, covering everything from the exotic cars that would be destroyed in the chase to the complex rigging required for the aerial stunts. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the placement of safety barriers to protect curious onlookers, to the coordination with local law enforcement to ensure the elaborate production wouldn't disrupt the city's daily rhythm more than absolutely necessary. Jason walked the route one final time, his experienced eye noting every potential hazard, every mark where he'd need to hit his cues perfectly to maintain both the scene's dramatic impact and the safety of everyone involved. This wasn't just another day at the office for him. It was the culmination of months of physical preparation, script development, and the kind of collaborative artistry that transforms written words into cinematic gold. The morning had started. Like countless others throughout his career, Jason arrived at his trailer before dawn, as was his habit, using the quiet hours to review his lines, go through his physical warm-up routine, and mentally prepare for the intense day ahead. His dedication to his craft was legendary in Hollywood circles. While many actors relied heavily on stunt doubles, Jason insisted on performing as many of his own stunts as safety protocols would allow, a commitment that had earned him respect from directors, fellow actors, and crew members alike. At 56, Jason remained in peak physical condition, his daily training regimen as rigorous as any professional athlete's. The scars on his hands told the story of a career built on authenticity, real bruises, real sweat, real commitment to giving audiences the most visceral action experiences possible. Yet, beneath the tough exterior that had made him one of action, cinema's most recognizable faces, lay a thoughtful man who approached each role with the same methodical preparation that had made him successful in his earlier career as a competitive diver. The crew had worked with Jason on previous films, and they'd come to appreciate not just his professionalism, but his genuine concern for everyone's well-being on set. Between takes, he could often be found chatting with the catering staff, asking about their families, or helping younger crew members understand the technical aspects of filmmaking. It was this combination of professional excellence and personal warmth that had made him not just a star, but a beloved figure among those who worked behind the cameras. As the morning progressed, the energy on set built to the controlled intensity that marked the beginning of a major action sequence. The first assistant director, Sandra Hansen, called out instructions through her megaphone, coordinating the movement of dozens of crew members into their positions. Camera operators tested their equipment one final time, while the special effects team conducted final safety checks on the practical explosions that would punctuate the chase sequence. Jason took his position at the starting mark, his character, Vincent's leather jacket replaced by the identical backup that wardrobe had prepared for the inevitable wear and tear of the day's filming. The makeup team applied final touches to the carefully crafted bruises and cuts that told the story of Vincent's previous encounters with the film's villains. Every detail was perfect, every element in place for what promised to be one of the film's most memorable sequences. The neighborhood around the film set had taken on a festival-like atmosphere despite the early hour. Local residents had gathered behind the safety barriers, many holding smartphones to capture glimpses of the action star they'd only seen on movie screens. Children pressed against the barricades, their eyes wide with excitement at witnessing real Hollywood magic in their own neighborhood. Parents held toddlers on their shoulders, pointing out the massive cameras and explaining in simple terms what they were watching. Among the crowd, 8-year-old Timothy Ramirez stood with his mother, Maria Hernandez, who had brought him to watch the filming before school. Timothy clutched a small action figure, one of Jason's characters from a previous film that he'd saved his allowance to buy. The boy's excitement was palpable as he watched the star he idolized prepare for the scene, his young imagination already running wild with dreams of adventure and heroism. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows between the buildings and creating the perfect lighting conditions that the cinematographer had planned for. The director of photography, Kyle Murphy, made final adjustments to the camera positions, ensuring that every angle would capture the raw intensity of the action while maintaining the visual poetry that elevated the film above simple spectacle. Jason moved through his final preparations with the focused calm of a professional athlete before a major competition. He reviewed the sequence's timing one more time with his stunt coordinator, confirming the precise moments when he'd need to dive, roll, and sprint to hit his marks perfectly. The coordination required was extraordinary. Not just his own movements, but the timing with the vehicles, the other actors, and the cameras that would be tracking alongside him at high speed. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as crew members took their final positions. This was what they'd all been working toward. Months of pre-production, weeks of rehearsal, and careful planning were about to culminate in the kind of action sequence that would have audiences on the edge of their seats in theaters around the world. Every person on set, from the star to the lowliest production assistant, understood they were part of something special, something that would live on long after the cameras stopped rolling. Little did anyone know that the most memorable moment of the day wouldn't be part of the scripted action at all, but would come from an unexpected interruption that would reveal something far more powerful than any explosion or chase scene ever could. Sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones we plan to tell, but the ones that emerge spontaneously from the authentic moments of human connection that no script could ever capture. The final countdown had begun, and everyone on the bustling film set was about to witness something extraordinary, though not at all what they were expecting when the director would eventually call action. For what would become the most talked about moment in Jason Statham's entire career. Action! Marcus Chen's voice cut through the morning air like a starting pistol, and instantly the carefully orchestrated chaos of the film set erupted into motion. Jason Statham launched into his sequence with the fluid precision of a seasoned professional, his body moving through the choreographed movements as naturally as breathing. The cameras rolled smoothly on their tracks, capturing every angle of his sprint down the sun-drenched street as the sound of approaching engines signaled the beginning of the chase sequence that had taken weeks to plan. The crowd behind the barriers watched in fascination as Hollywood magic unfolded before their eyes. Parents pointed excitedly at the action, explaining to their children how movies were made, while teenagers held up phones to capture snippets of the famous actor in action. The energy was infectious. This was the kind of behind-the-scenes access that most people could only dream of experiencing, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something special. But as Jason rounded the corner at precisely the moment the script demanded, something unexpected happened that would change the entire trajectory of the day. A sound cut through the rumble of engines and the coordinated shouts of the crew. A sound that stopped the action star dead in his tracks, despite the cameras still rolling and the elaborate sequence continuing around him. It was the unmistakable sound of a child crying, not the brief whimper of a toddler wanting attention or the frustrated wail of someone who dropped their ice cream. This was deeper, more desperate, the kind of crying that speaks to something fundamental in the human heart, the sound of genuine distress that no caring adult can ignore. Jason's head turned instinctively toward the sound, his professional focus momentarily forgotten as something more primal took over. Behind the safety barriers, 8-year-old Timothy Ramirez was experiencing what felt like the worst moment of his young life. The action figure he'd been clutching, his prized possession that represented his hero and his dreams, had slipped from his small fingers during the excitement of watching the chase sequence begin. The small plastic figure had fallen through a gap in the barrier and now lay in the middle of the street, directly in the path of the approaching stunt vehicles. Timothy's mother, Maria Hernandez, knelt beside her son, trying to comfort him while simultaneously explaining why she couldn't simply run into the street to retrieve the toy. "Mijo, it's just a toy," she whispered, though her heart broke seeing her son's genuine anguish. "We can get another one." But to Timothy, it wasn't just a toy. It was his connection to the world of adventure and heroism that Jason Statham represented. And watching it about to be destroyed felt like watching his dreams get crushed under the wheels of reality. The security personnel manning the barriers noticed the commotion but were bound by their protocols. The filming was in progress. The street was an active set, and civilian safety was their primary concern. One of them, a kindly man named Daniel Allen, tried to reassure the crying child. "Hey, buddy, don't worry about it. I'm sure we can figure something out once they finish filming." But his words couldn't penetrate Timothy's distress, and the crying continued. Jason had stopped completely now, despite the fact that the cameras were still rolling and the expensive production was continuing around him. The director, Marcus Chen, initially assumed it was a planned pause. Perhaps Jason had spotted a safety concern or needed a moment to reset for the next part of the sequence. But as the seconds ticked by and Jason remained motionless, looking toward the crowd with an expression of concern rather than concentration, it became clear that something unscripted was happening. "Cut!" Marcus finally called, bringing the elaborate sequence to a halt. Vehicles slowed to their designated stopping positions. Cameras stopped rolling, and dozens of crew members looked around in confusion, trying to understand what had interrupted the carefully planned action. The sudden silence that followed was almost eerie after the controlled chaos of the chase sequence, broken only by the continued sound of Timothy's heartbroken sobs. Jason was already moving toward the barrier. His character Vincent's urgency replaced by something entirely different, a genuine human concern that transcended any role he'd ever played. His weathered features, which had intimidated countless on-screen villains, were soft with empathy. As he approached the source of the crying, the crew watched in amazement as their tough guy Star knelt down to the child's eye level, his imposing physical presence somehow becoming gentle and approachable. "Hey there, what's wrong?" Jason's voice carried none of the gravelly intensity that moviegoers associated with his characters. Instead, it was warm and genuinely caring, the tone of someone who understood that sometimes the smallest problems feel enormous when you're 8 years old. Timothy looked up through his tears, his eyes widening as he realized that his hero was speaking directly to him, was concerned about his tears. Maria Hernandez felt her own eyes begin to water as she watched the famous actor show such genuine care for her son. She'd brought Timothy to watch the filming as a special treat, hoping to give him a memory he'd treasure forever. She never could have imagined that memory would involve such a personal interaction with the star himself. "His toy fell," she explained to Jason, pointing toward the small action figure lying in the street. "He's been saving his allowance for months to buy it." Jason followed her gesture and spotted the action figure. Ironically, a toy version of himself from one of his previous films. The sight of it lying there, about to be crushed or swept away, seemed to affect him deeply. Perhaps he saw in that small piece of plastic all the dreams and aspirations that his work represented to young fans around the world. Perhaps he remembered being 8 years old himself, when the smallest possessions could hold the greatest. Meaning, without hesitation, Jason stood and walked toward the production barrier. "Daniel," he called to the security guard, "I need to get that toy." Daniel Allen looked uncertain. The street was technically still an active film set, and safety protocols were strictly enforced for good reason. But there was something in Jason's tone that brooked no argument, a quiet authority that had nothing to do with celebrity status and everything to do with simple human decency. The entire film crew watched in fascination as their leading man carefully stepped into the street. This wasn't part of any script, wasn't a publicity stunt or a calculated move to generate positive press. This was simply a man who couldn't bear to see a child's heart break over something he had the power to fix. The cameras weren't rolling, but several crew members instinctively began recording with their phones, sensing they were witnessing something genuinely special. Jason bent down and carefully picked up the action figure, examining it for any damage from its fall. The small plastic representation of his own screen persona seemed almost absurd in his large, scarred hands. Hands that had performed countless movie fights and death-defying stunts, now gently cradling a child's toy. He brushed off a bit of dust and made sure all the joints still moved properly before walking back toward Timothy. The crowd had grown quiet, sensing that something meaningful was happening. Other children pressed forward against the barriers, watching wide-eyed as the action star they'd only seen as larger-than-life characters on screen revealed himself to be something even better, a real person who cared about real problems. No matter how small they might seem to adults. Timothy had stopped crying now, though tears still clung to his cheeks as he watched his hero approach with his rescued treasure. Jason knelt down again, bringing himself to the child's level as he gently placed the action figure back into Timothy's small hands. "There you go, buddy," he said with a smile that transformed his often stern features. "Good as new." But Jason wasn't finished. Something about the boy's obvious admiration, something about the careful way he held the toy and the wonder in his eyes, seemed to move the actor deeply. "You know what?" Jason said, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone that suggested he was about to share a secret. "I think that little guy there is pretty tough, but I bet he could use a friend." With that, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small pin, the official logo from the film they were currently shooting. Timothy's eyes grew even wider as Jason carefully pinned the emblem to the boy's shirt. "Now you're part of the team," Jason said with the kind of smile that could light up a movie screen. "What's your name, champ?" When Timothy whispered his name, still barely able to believe this was really happening, Jason nodded seriously. "Well, Timothy, I want you to take good care of that action figure, and remember, real heroes aren't just the ones you see in movies. Real heroes are people who help others, who stand up for what's right, and who never give up on their dreams." The crowd that had gathered to watch a movie being filmed was witnessing something far more valuable than any action sequence. They were seeing genuine kindness in action, watching a man use his influence and status not for personal gain, but to transform a child's tears into wonder. Parents found themselves fighting back their own tears as they watched their children absorb this lesson about compassion and taking the time to care about others. Maria Hernandez stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion as she tried to thank Jason for his kindness. But he waved off her gratitude with the same casual gesture he might use to dismiss praise for a well-executed stunt. "No need to thank me," he said warmly. "Timothy here just reminded me of something important. Sometimes, the best moments aren't the ones we plan for." He turned back to the boy one final time. "You keep being awesome, okay? And remember what I said about real heroes." As Jason stood to return to the set, something had fundamentally changed in the atmosphere. The crew members who had witnessed the interaction looked at their leading man with a new kind of respect, not the professional admiration they'd always held for his dedication to his craft, but something deeper. They'd seen behind the tough guy persona to the man underneath, someone who understood that true strength sometimes means stopping everything to dry a child's tears. The director Marcus Chen watched the entire scene unfold with the eye of someone who understood storytelling in all its forms. What he'd just witnessed wasn't something that could be scripted or choreographed. It was authentic human connection at its purest, the kind of moment that reminded everyone present why they'd fallen in love with the power of storytelling in the first place. As Jason walked back toward his starting position to resume filming, the energy on the set had transformed completely. What had begun as just another day of professional movie making had become something much more meaningful. A reminder that the best stories aren't always the ones told on screen, but the ones we create through our actions when we think no one is watching. Word spread through the film, set like wildfire, but not in the way Hollywood gossip usually travels. This wasn't whispered speculation about celebrity drama or behind-the-scenes conflicts. Instead, it was something entirely different. A sense of genuine pride and admiration as crew members shared what they'd witnessed with colleagues who had been positioned too far away to see the interaction directly. Camera operator Holly Peterson found herself describing the scene to gaffer Frank Johnson, her voice filled with the kind of wonder usually reserved for discussing technical innovations or breakthrough performances. "You should have seen his face," Holly explained, adjusting her equipment as the crew prepared to resume filming. It wasn't Jason Statham, the movie star, talking to that kid. It was just a guy who saw someone upset and wanted to help. Frank nodded knowingly, having worked with enough celebrities over his 30-year career to recognize the difference between calculated public relations moves and authentic moments of human decency. The story rippled outward from the immediate, grew to the catering staff, where Heather Fisher was preparing lunch for the production. She'd been working craft services on film sets for 15 years and had seen stars treat fans and crew members with everything from gracious warmth to casual dismissal. What she was hearing about Jason's impromptu break from filming to comfort a crying child struck her as something special, something worth talking about, not because it was unusual behavior for him specifically, but because it was beautiful behavior from anyone in his position. Meanwhile, Timothy Ramirez had transformed from a heartbroken child into something approaching a small celebrity himself among the gathered crowd. Other children pressed closer to see the official film pin that Jason had given him, while their parents struck up conversations with Maria Hernandez about the unexpected kindness they'd all witnessed. The atmosphere behind the barriers had shifted from simple curiosity about movie making to something warmer and more communal, as if everyone present had become part of an extended family, connected by a shared moment of goodness. 8-year-old Isabella Jackson, who had been watching the filming with her grandmother Evelyn Shields, couldn't stop staring at Timothy's new pin. "Grandma," she whispered, "do you think Jason Statham would talk to me too?" Evelyn smiled, understanding that her granddaughter wasn't asking out of jealousy, but from genuine hope. "I think," she said carefully, "that if you really needed help with something, he probably would. But the important thing isn't whether he would help you, it's that you saw how important it is to help others when they need it." The conversation was overheard by several other families, and soon an impromptu discussion had developed among the adults about kindness, celebrity, and the responsibility that comes with influence. Jennifer Scott, a teacher who had brought her own children to watch the filming, found herself explaining to the group how she would use this story in her classroom. "This is exactly the kind of example I try to give my students," she said. "It's not about being famous or important. It's about recognizing when someone needs help and taking action." Back on the film set, the crew was discovering that resuming normal operations after such an emotionally charged interruption was more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Not because anyone was distracted or unprofessional, but because the mood had shifted so dramatically that returning to the fictional world of the movie felt almost jarring. The violence and conflict that drove the plot seemed less important somehow when contrasted with the real-world kindness they just witnessed. Director of photography Kyle Murphy found himself making subtle adjustments to his planned shots unconsciously, influenced by what he'd observed about Jason's character off camera. "You know what?" he said to his camera assistants Gabriel Daniels and George Schultz. "I think we should get some tighter shots on Jason's face during the quieter moments. After seeing how he handled that situation with the kid, I have a feeling there are layers to his performance we haven't been capturing fully." Jason himself seemed different as he prepared to resume filming. The focused intensity that had marked his preparation that morning had been replaced by something more relaxed, more openly connected to the people around him. He spent several minutes chatting with stunt coordinator Jeffrey Valdez about the safety protocols for the next sequence, but the conversation kept drifting to broader topics. Jeffrey's own children, the responsibility that comes with being a role model, the way that small gestures can have profound impacts. "You know," Jeffrey said as they reviewed the choreography for the upcoming fight scene, "my daughter Jenna Munoz, she's 10. She's going to flip when I tell her about what happened today. Not because you're a movie star, but because of what you did for that kid. That's the kind of story that sticks with children forever." Jason nodded thoughtfully, seeming to process the long-term implications of his spontaneous decision to help Timothy. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Rebecca Cooper, who played the film's tech specialist and had been watching the earlier events unfold from her position near the craft services tent. "Jason," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that spoke to genuine friendship rather than mere professional courtesy, "I just wanted to tell you that what you did for..." That little boy was beautiful. "My nephew Jordan Rodriguez is about that age, and I know how much his action figures mean to him. You probably just created a memory that kid will treasure for the rest of his life." What Rebecca didn't mention, but what several crew members had begun to notice, was that Jason's act of kindness was having a broader effect on the entire production. Small gestures of consideration and helpfulness were appearing throughout the set. Crew members going out of their way to assist each other, extras offering to share snacks with teammates, even the usually brusque assistant directors speaking more gently to the background performers. It was as if witnessing authentic compassion had reminded everyone present of their better angels. The phenomenon wasn't lost on veteran script supervisor Christine Gentry, who had worked on hundreds of productions over her 25-year career. She'd seen how the mood and atmosphere of a set could affect everything from performances to productivity, and she was watching something remarkable unfold. "I've never seen anything quite like this," she confided to costume designer Charlene Ortega during a brief break between setups. "It's like that one moment of genuine kindness created a ripple effect through the entire crew." Charlene nodded in agreement, thinking about her own observations. "I noticed it too. Even the background performers seem more engaged, more present. It's like everyone wants to live up to the example they saw." She paused, considering her words carefully. "You know, we spend so much time creating fictional heroes and villains. Sometimes we forget that the most powerful stories are the real ones happening right in front of us." The insight was particularly poignant given the nature of the film they were making. The script called for Jason's character Vincent to be a man struggling with his past, seeking redemption through heroic actions in the face of overwhelming odds. The parallels between the fictional hero and the real-world kindness they'd witnessed were not lost on anyone present, and several crew members found themselves viewing the day's remaining scenes through a different lens. As the afternoon progressed and filming resumed, the crowd behind the barriers began to grow rather than diminish. Word of Jason's gesture had spread through social media, with parents posting about the unexpected lesson in kindness their children had witnessed. The hashtags #JustARealHero and #JustKindnessMatters began trending locally, accompanied by photos and videos of Timothy clutching his rescued action figure and proudly displaying his official film pin. But perhaps the most significant development was one that went largely unnoticed by the casual observers. Timothy himself had undergone a transformation that went far beyond simply having his toy returned. The 8-year-old boy, who had been crying inconsolably just hours earlier, was now moving through the crowd with newfound confidence, sharing his story with other children and, more importantly, looking for ways to help others. When a younger child dropped her juice box and began to cry, Timothy was the first to retrieve it for her. When an elderly man struggled to see over the crowd, Timothy offered to describe what was happening on the film set. The lesson Jason had shared about real heroes being people who help others hadn't just been heard, it had been internalized and was already being put into practice. Maria Hernandez watched her son's behavior with a mixture of pride and amazement. She'd raised Timothy to be kind and considerate, but seeing him actively look for opportunities to help others represented a quantum leap in his emotional development. "Mijo," she said gently when he returned to her side after helping direct a lost tourist toward the nearest restroom. "I'm very proud of how you're acting today." Timothy beamed up at her, the action figure still clutched securely in one hand while the other touched the pin on his shirt. "Jason said real heroes help people. Timothy explained with the earnest intensity that only children can bring to newly understood truths. I want to be a real hero too. The simple statement carried such weight, such genuine intention, that Maria felt tears prick at her eyes once again. In the space of a few hours, her son had learned one of life's most important lessons, not from a lecture or a punishment, but from witnessing kindness in action and being treated with dignity and respect by someone he admired. The transformation wasn't limited to Timothy, though his was perhaps the most dramatic. Throughout the crowd, children were engaging more thoughtfully with their siblings and friends. Parents were speaking more patiently with their excited offspring, and strangers were striking up conversations based on their shared witnessing of something genuinely uplifting. The film set had become an impromptu community, united by a common experience of witnessing goodness in an unexpected place. As the day wore on and the filming schedule continued, it became clear that this would be remembered not as the day they shot the big chase sequence for the latest action blockbuster, but as the day Jason Statham reminded everyone present that the best stories aren't always the ones captured on film, but the ones we write through our actions when faced with opportunities to make someone else's day a little brighter. 3 months after that extraordinary day on the film set, the ripple effects of Jason Statham's simple act of kindness continued to spread in ways that no one could have predicted. The story had taken on a life of its own, not because of any publicity campaign or marketing strategy, but because it represented something that people genuinely needed to hear in a world often dominated by negativity and division. What had begun as a spontaneous moment of compassion between a movie star and a crying child had evolved into something much more significant. A reminder that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful ones are also the quietest. Timothy Ramirez had become something of a local celebrity in his elementary school, but not in the superficial way that might be expected. Rather than simply bragging about meeting a famous actor, Timothy had taken Jason's words about real heroes to heart in a way that impressed both his teachers and classmates. His third-grade teacher, Amanda Kim, found herself using Timothy's story as an example when discussing character education with her students, not because of his encounter with fame, but because of how he'd chosen to apply the lesson he'd learned. Timothy has started a kindness club at recess, Amanda explained to Timothy's mother during their quarterly parent-teacher conference. He organizes the older kids to help younger students who are having trouble with playground equipment, and he's even convinced some of the popular kids to include children who usually play alone. It's remarkable to see how one conversation with someone he admired has shaped his understanding of leadership and responsibility. Maria Hernandez listened with pride as the teacher described her son's transformation. The action figure that had caused such distress on the film set now sat on Timothy's bedroom shelf, not as a toy to be played with, but as a reminder of the day he learned that his heroes could be real people doing real good in the world. The official film pin had been carefully mounted in a small frame beside his bed, where he could see it each morning as a reminder of Jason's words about what makes someone a true hero. But Timothy's story was just one thread in a much larger tapestry that continued to weave itself across the community and beyond. The video footage captured by crew members on their phones had eventually made its way to social media, not through any calculated release strategy, but through the organic sharing of people who had been moved by what they'd witnessed. The clips showed Jason's genuine concern for the crying child, his careful retrieval of the fallen action figure, and most powerfully, the moment when he knelt down to comfort Timothy and share his wisdom about real heroism. The response had been overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Parents shared the video with their children, teachers incorporated it into lessons about empathy and kindness, and community organizations began referencing it as an example of how small actions can have profound impacts. The hashtag Real Hero Moment had gained traction not through celebrity promotion, but through genuine grassroots enthusiasm from people who saw in Jason's actions a reflection of the kind of world they wanted to help create. Dr. Patricia Gomez, a child psychologist who had studied the impact of role models on childhood development, found herself frequently discussing the incident in her professional presentations. What made this interaction so powerful, she would explain to audiences of educators and parents, wasn't just that a celebrity was kind to a child, though that was certainly meaningful. It was that he took the time to teach while he helped, to connect the act of kindness to a larger philosophy about what it means to be heroic in everyday life. The lesson had resonated far beyond Timothy's immediate circle. Schools across the country had begun incorporating discussions about the difference between fictional heroes and real-world heroism into their curricula, using Jason's words as a starting point for conversations about how children could make a positive difference in their own communities. The simple message that real heroes are people who help others, stand up for what's right, and never give up on their dreams had proven to have remarkable staying power. Jason himself had been somewhat surprised by the ongoing attention his spontaneous act had received. During a recent interview promoting the completed film, entertainment journalist Scott Williams had asked him about the incident, giving Jason an opportunity to reflect on its significance. "Honestly," Jason had said, his characteristic gruff voice softening slightly, "I didn't think much about it at the time. You see a kid upset, you help if you can. That's what anyone should do. But if people want to use that moment to talk about kindness and helping each other, then I'm glad something good came out of a little boy's bad day." What Jason hadn't mentioned in the interview, but what those close to him had observed, was how the incident had affected his own approach to his celebrity status. Always professional and courteous with fans, he had become even more intentional about positive interactions, particularly with young admirers. His security team, led by the veteran Kevin Smith, had noticed the change immediately. "He's always been good with fans," Kevin observed, "but something shifted after that day on set. He seems more aware of the impact his words and actions can have, especially with kids." The awareness had translated into concrete actions. During the film's promotional tour, Jason had made time for several impromptu visits to children's hospitals and community centers, never with cameras or publicity fanfare, but simply because he'd begun to understand more deeply the responsibility that came with being someone that children looked up to. The visits weren't publicized, but word inevitably leaked out, adding to his reputation as someone who backed up his public message about real heroism with private action. One such visit had taken place at a pediatric cancer ward, where Jason spent an afternoon with young patients who were facing challenges far more serious than a dropped toy. 8-year-old Michael Spencer, undergoing treatment for leukemia, had been particularly excited to meet his action hero. But rather than simply signing autographs and taking photos, Jason had spent nearly an hour listening to Michael talk about his treatment, his fears, and his dreams for the future. "You know what, Michael," Jason had said, echoing the words he'd shared with Timothy months earlier. "You're already a real hero, fighting this illness, staying brave for your family, keeping your spirits up even when things are tough. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done in a movie." The conversation had left a profound impact, not just on Michael, but on the medical staff who witnessed it, several of whom later shared the story with colleagues and friends as an example of how public figures could use their influence for genuine good. Dr. Michelle Walker, the head of pediatric oncology at the hospital, had been present during Jason's visit and had observed firsthand the impact his words had on her young patients. "What struck me most," she later recalled, "was that he didn't come in trying to cheer them up with jokes or distractions. He treated these children with the same respect and dignity he would show adults, acknowledging their struggles while affirming their strength. It was exactly what they needed to hear. The ripple effects extended beyond individual interactions to influence broader conversations about celebrity, responsibility, and the power of positive role models. Academic researchers began studying the incident as an example of how authentic behavior could create more lasting impact than carefully crafted public relations campaigns. Dr. Rachel Smith, who taught media studies at the local university, assigned her students to analyze the difference between calculated celebrity charity work and spontaneous acts of kindness, using Jason's film set intervention as a case study. What's fascinating about this incident, Dr. Smith explained to her students, is that it gained traction precisely because it felt authentic. There were no photographers present, no publicists orchestrating the moment, no immediate benefit to the celebrity involved. It was simply a human being responding with kindness to another human being's distress. And that authenticity is what made it resonate so strongly with people. The academic analysis was interesting, but perhaps more significant were the countless small-scale imitations of Jason's example that began appearing in communities everywhere. Teachers reported students being more helpful to classmates who were upset, parents shared stories of their children spontaneously comforting others, and community organizations saw increases in volunteer participation as people looked for ways to be real heroes in their own spheres of influence. The film itself, when it was finally released, carried an additional layer of meaning for those who knew the story behind its creation. The action sequences were as spectacular as audiences expected, and Jason's performance as Vincent maintained his reputation as one of cinema's most compelling action stars. But for those who had witnessed or heard about that day on set, every scene of Vincent helping others or standing up for what was right carried the weight of real-world authenticity. The premiere event included a special moment that few in attendance were expecting. As Jason walked the red carpet, fielding the usual questions about stunts and storylines, he was approached by a familiar face in the crowd. Timothy Ramirez, now several inches taller and radiating confidence, stood with his mother behind the media barriers, still wearing the pin Jason had given him months earlier. Jason immediately excused himself from his interview and walked over to greet Timothy, their reunion captured by dozens of cameras, but feeling as private and genuine as their first meeting. "How are you doing, champ?" Jason asked, kneeling down, once again to Timothy's eye level. "Still taking care of that action figure?" Timothy grinned widely, pulling the toy from his jacket pocket where he'd been keeping it safe during the crowded premiere event. "I take it everywhere," he said proudly, "and I've been helping other kids at school, just like you said real heroes do." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, as was the impact that one conversation had continued to have on his young life. The exchange lasted only a few minutes, but the photos and videos captured would become some of the most widely shared content from the premiere, not because of any dramatic revelation or celebrity scandal, but because they represented the completion of a circle, a moment of kindness that had grown into something much larger, touching countless lives and reminding everyone who witnessed it that the most powerful stories are often the simplest ones. As the evening progressed and Jason returned to the glamorous world of movie premieres and red carpet interviews, Timothy and his mother headed home. But not before the boy had made several new friends among the other children in the crowd. He'd shared his story, shown off his pin, and even helped calm down a younger child who had become overwhelmed by the chaos and excitement of the premiere. Watching her son navigate the crowd with such confidence and compassion, Maria Hernandez reflected on how profoundly that single day on the film set had changed both their lives. Not because of the celebrity encounter itself, but because of the lesson it had taught about the power of kindness, the importance of helping others, and the reality that heroes come in all forms, including action stars who take time to comfort, crying children and 8-year-old boys who turn their own moments of distress into opportunities to help others. The story that had begun with tears on a Hollywood film set had evolved into something much more meaningful, a reminder that in a world often focused on spectacle and sensation, the most important moments are frequently the quietest ones, when one person simply chooses to care about another person's pain and takes action to help heal it. Jason Statham had stopped mid-scene to comfort a crying child, but in doing so, he had started something much larger, a chain reaction of kindness that continued to spread, one small act of heroism at a time. Years later, when Timothy Ramirez would look back on the moment that shaped his understanding of what it means to be a hero, he would remember not just the famous actor who helped him, but the lesson that true strength comes from lifting others up, that real courage means standing up for what's right, and that the most important dreams are the ones that include making the world a little better for everyone around us.